I was molested and or sexually abused when I was 10. First starting out when I was 10 by a individual in my family. The abuse went on for years. If I had to put a correct number, I'd say it finally diminished around 13-ish, around there, 4 or 5 years. And I have very pivotal moments and memories from specific instances within, different appropriate encounters with this individual. And I think a lot of people like me who go through something like that at such a young age, well, I have spoken to many people who were around the same age as me when this happened to them, and it's attached to very monumental moments in their life. So, for instance, the first time that it had occurred with me was after my grandmother's funeral. And so I believe that because such heinous acts occur at such a young age, you become to think that that's normal. So I believe that when these atrocities happen, when you are so young like that, you can begin to think that this is normal, because that's exactly what had taken place with me. And it wasn't until I became a teenager to where, you're a little bit more knowledgeable and, in your puberty age to where you are aware that this is not okay. But that when it's such as young as 10, you're not really aware that this is not something that is appropriate. And because you have not been experienced or you have not been introduced to certain things, so in your mind you're thinking, hey, this is okay, so you're not really too concerned or focused on trying to let it be known that it is occurring. And or some persons may be influenced to believe that this is okay, leading them not to come out and say something about it. But it is a vicious cycle that is not just worldwide, but it could literally be the person sitting next to you, and they could have been subject to sexual abuse at some time of their life. That's how common, sadly, that it is. And I have since realized from doing my own research and from going to counseling and to being involved in conversations with individuals who have survived this, that your abuser, for lack of a better word at the time, the predator, will look for the vulnerable kid, the kid who they know is not so loud and boisterous, or the kid who's kind of quiet, the kid who is kind of searching for that attention, or the kid who's easygoing. And that's really what they're attracted to, most of them. I mean, so I was that kid. Lasted for a few years, and each year would progress into something different, into something more horrific. And once it starts, it's usually something very minimal that they introduce you to, and like I said, it just progresses and progresses further and further until something happens to where you're out of it. And in my case, it was my parents were moving to Canton, and yeah, the individual didn't have access to me as they did before. So that's pretty much when it had ended, for sure, for good. I didn't really cope. I think that I adapted more so than I coped. Uh, I do believe that my behavior changed at the time. Now, I wasn't a disrespectful kid ever, or I really wasn't too much of an outgoing person, very shy, quiet person. I mean, I had a personality, but I wasn't a loud, boisterous kid. But I do recall within myself experiencing or noticing that my behavior and attitude began to change between the years of, like, that 12 to 14 teenage, you're becoming a teenager year. I began to want to change my appearance to try and see if that would deter some of the acts from the individual. For instance, I remember that I didn't want my hair to be any other way than like braids toward the back, or I wanted to just wear hoodies and sneakers and jeans, nothing that I felt would be an attraction or that would bring attention to me. So yeah, I don't really think I had a secure coping mechanism. I actually marvel to this day. I marvel at God's grace that He had and has had toward me still to this day, because I don't think that I would have overcome had I not had that firm foundation, that relationship with God. I remember instances to where I would have suicidal thoughts, and there were suicidal attempts. Thank God that those attempts, failed, but they were there. For instance, I remember, wow, this is tough for me to speak about this specific instance, but I remember taking this razor that I had found, and I remember just going to town with that razor, and I still have the marks to this day. And I remember as I was sitting there in that bathroom, and I was ready and willing to take myself out in such a way that I was almost upset that it didn't happen. I remember reading up on something. At the time we didn't have access to the internet like that at my fingertips like we do now. But I remember just having some form of information on what and how to do this, and I was ready and willing at any cost for it to happen. And I took that razor and I was just cutting away and cutting away. And in my little crazy mind back then, I thought, the first thing, it just spurted out and blood would go everywhere, and I just died on the floor. And I kept going and going, and it never happened. And I was like, well, why isn't it happening, And I got so upset. And thinking back on that, it's a very horrible memory, because, I was willing to take myself out based on something that someone else was doing to me that wasn't right. And so at that time, in my mind, it was a punishment to myself for allowing it to happen, and that guilt and shame, and I was ready and willing to end my life so that it wouldn't continue to happen. What made me tell my story or get the courage to actually speak out about it was I had to take a real deep look within myself to figure out how this would affect everyone, and also how it would affect me. Because at the time I was dealing with a lot of health issues, and I know that stress is one of the things that heightens my flare-ups and things like that. So I did have literally, I went months with thinking about how or why, the why behind it all. And because I never want to do in life, for me, whatever I do needs to have a meaning, and there needs to be a plan of action of why I'm doing something. So I knew why I wanted to do it, but I had to figure out what would come after that, and I had to be okay with that. So I did a lot of praying, and I did a lot of seeking God to give me direction and the answer to see if this was something that I needed to do, and if this was something that He wanted me to do. I actually came to the realization after spending a lot of time thinking and meditating, but I came to the determination that this was bigger than me, literally. I had to look at the bigger picture, and I had to realize that this wasn't just relegated to me, but this is a worldwide issue. Tons of people go through this, and they, wait, or they never say anything, and their abuser just goes on about their life. And this was way before the whole Me Too movement. It's because I had created a monologue for one of my birthdays before the Me Too movement was out and big. And I had the courage to get up there and, tell my story. Now, I had other things going on that day within the monologue, but this was a huge chunk of it. Because it does make or break a person. And, it happened in, your childhood, but then it also becomes a dysfunction for you in your adulthood. So that was another reason to where I said, well, if I can speak out and help somebody else, and they won't have to wait until they're an adult to try to get it right. I had a sense of fulfillment within that this was something that I was supposed to do. And I was at peace, and so I went ahead and took my chances. Honestly, the confidence was not there in the beginning, literally. I went to counseling, which that's another thing that I think is very crucial for people who go through things like this. Well, in anything that you're having trouble with, it's okay to go talk to someone. And I think that is a fear for some people, especially in the Black community. We like to keep everything in, and what's done in our family going to stay in our family, just sweep it under the rug. But going to counseling literally saved me. I think I gained that confidence and that strength through literally prayer, and that's the only thing that I can attribute that to. Uh, well, the court case came way after I had done my monologue. So mind you, this was for 4 or 5 years ago, I believe. Yeah, 4 years ago. I had gave myself a present for my birthday that year, and I had gave a monologue with like basically the story of my life, bits and pieces that were pivotal that got me to that year of my life. And that year was one of probably the worst years. Someone would classify it as the worst year of their life, but for me it was liberating and a bunch of chaos as well. So after I would say a week after the monologue, there was that what now moment that I was speaking about. You're doing this, so what now? What's the purpose behind it? What's next? And I really didn't know. I knew that I wanted to have a plan of action for justice to be ensued, but I really didn't know where to start. So I remember talking to some family members and gathering their insight on it, speaking to my counselor, and then of course my goddad. We had a very long conversation about what we would do next. So we went to the Detroit Police Department. In this instance, it was my uncle and I, and we went and we met with the detective, and we sat there, and I had to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and then they brought me back to the room, and he asked me a series of questions. Oh, well, first he asked my uncle to step out, and they do that because they don't want to feel like a person is being influenced to say this or that. So my uncle had to go, and they asked me a series of questions. Then I had to write down. They gave me a paper with those same questions, and I had to write it. Then they asked me the questions again. Another individual came in, asked me the same questions. I replied, you know, basically telling your story or reporting your statement, basically. And so they brought my uncle back in, and they said, you know, here's what we're going to do next. And they asked me, was I aware of it happening to anyone else? Now, at the time of my monologue, it was said and brought out that it had happened to a few other people in my family. And so at that time, that's when I knew that this was supposed to happen, that I was supposed to be the one to speak out and to be the one to shed light on this so that it wouldn't continue to happen. And so I let the detective know at that time that I was aware of that it had happened. Well, I let the detective know at that time that it had recently been brought to my attention that it had happened to someone else, but I was not there to tell their story. I was there to tell mine. So shortly after that, we were done, and they said they would be in contact with myself as well as the detective and the other persons that were working on the case, and that they would be in contact with me in a couple of days for our next plan of action. So at that time, I went on about my day. We went back to my uncle's house for a few, and I went back home, and I like to say literally within 24 to 48 hours. I remember I had gone to work with my aunt, and then I had begun to get a bunch of phone calls back to back to back to back to back. And that's when the chaos ensued. So the first call I got, and they said, oh, you know, they went and picked such and such up, blah, 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 and they had gone to take him into custody. And I had no, it was surprising to me as well. I didn't think it would happen so fast. I thought that we would have a little time to try to figure out what our next plan was, but they got right on top of things. You know, some threats came. Individuals went to social media. I'm sure some of you watching this saw that played out on Facebook. I don't want to say that I begin to get scared or fearful. I begin to feel how I usually get when I feel a little bit of under pressure, overwhelmed, or stressed out. And my aunt very calmly said to me, and I will never forget this, you're going to stay calm. All you have to do is stay calm and silent, and God's going to handle the rest. So I heard her saying that, and in the back of my head, I was still in a state of panic almost, because I mean, everybody knows their families, everybody know what caliber of people you deal with in your family. And so I was in a shock basically, because it literally happened so fast. But you know, I heard her, and I began to cry a little, and then I called my goddad, which is sometimes my another voice of reason for me, and he was able to talk me through some things, and you know, we said a little prayer, and we went on about the day. So then fast forward, they gave me a date that I had to be at the courthouse to stand before the judge and give my statement or what have you. So that day came, and this day I was with my goddad, and we went down to the police, not the police, I'm sorry. We went down to the courthouse early, very early. Some of my older family members were there. And then we had some other family members that were there that were a little bothered by this whole situation. You know, they walked me in. I was escorted in and escorted out. When I was escorted in, they put me in this holding room away from everybody else. And the detective came in and he let me know what was going to happen and when it would be a time to speak and when it would not be a time to speak. You know, they do that debriefing thing. And so the whole time I was calm. I was just trying to really get it over with at that point. I sat in that room, literally it felt like for hours when it wasn't that long, but for me it felt like forever. And I sat there and I just began to pray. I was like, Lord, please just, give me the strength. I'm going to go and stand before some individuals from my family who don't agree with this coming out ordeal. So I didn't want to be I didn't want to get out there and feel as if I was hated so much to where I wanted to just not go ahead and, pursue. So I was asking the Lord to just give me a sense of peace to where I can just go out here and do what I needed to do and say what I needed to say and tell my truth. It was a deeper meaning for me at the time. And I truly to this day still believe that it was the correct season for all of that to happen, honestly. I got out there, I sat on that bench, well, the little stool they had for me, and the judge addressed me, and then I had to state my name, my age, and then they asked me to point to the individual who we were there against that day. And so I pointed to him. I didn't really have too much eye contact with that side of the courtroom because I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want my focus to be altered. So I kept my eyes on the judge and the DA and the attorneys and everybody that had to ask me a question. My attorney asked me some questions, and his attorney asked me questions, and I said what I had to say, and I went right back into that room, and I sat there, and I do recall one time I looked over, and I recall this being the most hurtful one of the most hurtful moments during this whole process is when you see like your loved ones just look at you with such disgust. And then, that would be a moment for someone who wasn't as strong. Like I said, I really marvel at the strength and grace that I had, thanks to God, back then. But that would be the moment for most people where they would say, I can't do this. But oddly enough, that was the driving force for me. When I saw the looks and you hear the chatter and things like you see things on social media or what have you, that was like a driving force for me to say, you know what, keep going, this is what you're supposed to do. I don't I'm not gonna say it was easy because it wasn't. But I will say that one thing's for sure, two things for certain, that I was going to be the one to make sure that it didn't happen to anyone else. If I had to answer that, it would be that my feelings were in the beginning all over the place. But during my feelings, I would say were very calm. As I mentioned before, there was a lot of chatter on social media, a lot of chatter amongst some of my family members, and my aunt and uncle. They really were instrumental in keeping my mental clear. Along with some of my other family was in support of me as well as my counselor. I took myself off of social media during that whole entire process because I did not want to see anything negative that would deter my mission here. And it's not even that I want to call it a mission, that it was a purpose fulfilled in that season that God had allowed to come to fruition. So I wasn't out there really searching for what was being said. I was just focused on keeping myself clear. And God had it in such a way to where I was pitch perfect health that entire time. Whereas most of the time with the disease I have, I can be stressing out about what I'm going to wear tomorrow. And that little amount of stress will literally take me out for a week or two or put me into a flare. This caliber of stress that should have taken me literally out, nothing happened. So I do believe that this was a God thing. So after all of that had taken place, we waited to see if this was going to go to a trial, and I really didn't want to go to trial because I didn't want to put a lot of turmoil and stress on my body. So I literally was asking the proper questions for what would be the next step. So I remember getting a phone call, I want to say a few weeks after that, that they had written up a plea deal. They had written up this agreement, and they had called and asked me what my thoughts were on it. And they told me what the agreement was and what the outcome would be. And I had said, well, let me think about it and call you back. So I immediately went to my room. I was just like, Lord, just please let me know what to do. And so I just remember having this overwhelming peace, like, yeah, I'm okay with this. I'm just gonna say yes. So I didn't want to just call back and say yes, let's just get it over. I went in and told my aunt, and then of course I had contacted my goddad and some of my family that were in support of me at the time. And I told them I'm gonna go ahead and say, I'm okay with it. And certainly a lot of them were like, but it was, for me, it wasn't just about jail time. I did believe that some form of action needed to be taken for what had happened, not just to me, but for those that it had happened to, from this individual. Me being the spokesperson, me being one of the younger ones at that. So I did believe that this generational pathological cycle needed to stop, and that repercussions needed to be taken. However, it was more than just, let's just go and have this individual sit in a jail cell. For me, I knew that I needed to take it further. It goes deeper than just, hey, they need to go to jail or serve some time for this heinous act or what have you. But we need to figure out the root problem of why they are able, or why they have the thought process that this is something that you need to do to young kids. There's something deeper within them that is broken in such a way that will allow such a person to be able to continuously engage in certain inappropriate acts with children, young adults, or what have you, that needs to be figured out. And this goes for anything, not just a person who is a sex offender or a molester or what have you, this subject, but for a murderer, a thief, anything, there is a greater problem. And I don't think there's enough people out there who are willing to figure out the deeper issue. Why is this person like this? Why would this person think this was okay? Why can't they stop? So the why was more important to me. I was more so focused more on the counseling that the individual would need and would get while serving the time that was given to them. The jail wasn't my first priority. The jail time was a part of the process, but the help is what my focus was. But while they're in jail, they get out of jail and they go and create and continue on the same behavior. So I wanted the cycle to be broken in such a way that the person would get help to where they get out and they change their mindset to where it didn't have to happen to someone else. The length of the sentence that they were giving him, the jail time, the jail time. And then they had told me they would call back with the date to where the sentencing date. And that would be the day that I would go. if I wanted to. And they give you an opportunity to say something to the person if you want. And at first I said, you know, I was so over it at that point because I literally went through it. I'm not sitting here trying to portray that this was the easiest thing ever, because it literally wasn't. It was literally one of the most stressful times of my life, but at the same time most freeing and liberating time. And so I gave them a couple days before I gave my answer if I would come to the sentencing or not. And I decided to go because I felt like I had never expressed my true feelings on how I felt about what had happened, what had taken place. And I wanted the individual to know what damage it had done to me. I wanted him to see that I had overcome it and was still overcoming the residual of pain and hurt that was caused because of the acts that he had done to me. So that was the reason I decided to go, because I felt like he needed to know and understand the level of dysfunction that this was. And he also needed to know, understand, and hear from me that it wasn't okay. So the day had come for us to go to the sentencing, and it was myself, of course, my aunt, a very dear friend to us, my family. She flew here, literally flew here just to be with me. My uncle had came down, my cousins, some of my cousins who were in support of me, and of course G-Daddy, God-Dad was there. But we walked right in, and we walked right past some of my family who were opposing the situation, which were not that many. And we were sitting in that room, and then they had took me into another room and told me how this all would work and when I would speak and give my statement to him. And so we sat there, and it began. They bring the individual out, and they go over the case and how much time he would be away and all that, and the formality of court. And then they called me up to give my closing statement or what have you. I did not know if I would be able to look at him and speak, but for some reason there was this boldness that came over me, and I got up on that podium and I looked directly at him, and I said everything I needed to say. I mean, I had a page full of things to say. And you know, I did have a moment of getting choked up, which is understandable considering the literally few months that we had gone through. That was so draining. But that day had come, and I just was so happy that it was so over. I finally felt like I could go on with my life and not have to have this burden that I was so ashamed of or so scared to speak to anyone about because of the, you know, the guilt and shame that you put on yourself. So, you know, there were a lot of things that I had to say to him that day, and I'm so glad I did. No, I don't have any regrets. I had let what this person had done to me rule my life for years. And even when I was out of it, it still ruled me. And I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to take my life back, in such a, for lack of a better word. So I knew I needed to do something about it, and I did. And that's the most, I can't think of a better moment in my life. The most important moment of my life. So no, no regrets. What I would say to anyone going through this or pondering if they should say something is say it, speak up, don't wait. I would advise getting help because you cannot get through the mental portion of dealing with something like this on your own. You can be a person that has the biggest support system there is out there, but at night, when it's just you and that pillow and there's nobody else, and you cannot come out of that depression, you need to get help. And it's okay to get help. It's okay to talk to someone. I trust me, I know that how scary it is to go and sit there and tell some stranger your life story or what have you. But it is very therapeutic and it will help you. So what now? I am working on a project right now, and where I want to help individuals like me, and not just the people who are my age who have dealt with this and who are dealing with it, but especially the young people, because I feel as if I had someone back then who was paying attention to the signs, or who, I felt comfortable enough to go into depth about what was going on, and so forth, that a lot of time wouldn't have went by, and that I would have gotten the help I needed to get back then. So I have a heart for things like this for the younger persons that are dealing with it. So I have some things in mind that I want to execute to help people who have been sexually abused, who have been molested, who are still dealing with the trauma of all of that. But it's very crucial that people are talking about it. And I think it's very monumental that we have these organizations such as the METOO movement, and you have different organizations out there that are paying attention more so to things like this. And it's very encouraging. Before I leave this earth, I want people to understand that the cycle needs to stop, because at some point something had to happen to this individual for it to affect them in such a way that this is what they think is okay. So that's what the bigger problem is. The what was it in you that was broken that allowed you to do such things? Now, if I had all the money in the world, I would create a safe place for young children and teens to come to feel comfortable telling their story, and to feel comfortable releasing the anger that they are harboring for what has or is happening to them. Because if that were around when I was going through it, I think that I would have been in a better place mentally as an adult to deal with the trauma and dysfunction I had facilitated because of what had happened to me. My dad and my uncles had a group growing up, and their group was well known in Detroit. They were called Revived, and they had a song called If I Can Help Somebody. And back then, that was my favorite song by them. To this day, I still sometimes play it. And it says, if I can help somebody, then my living won't be in vain. And I grew up singing that song, and I mean, it was literally my favorite song by them, because that's literally my life's motto. All I want to do is help. And if I can help someone, I feel like my living won't be in vain. My purpose won't be in vain. I think this here was my purpose. And it took me all those years to figure it out. But better late than never. Because, I mean, if you don't find your purpose in life, you're just roaming around here trying to figure it out. And I didn't want to leave here not had an impact in some way on the world or the earth that we are walking around. I wanted to make a difference, especially concerning this subject, because it's so important and so crucial, and it happens to so many people. So if I can help anybody that's dealing with this in any shape, form, or fashion, if it's being a listening ear, if it's talking you through something, talking you through those suicidal moments, talking you through you know, those nightmares or anything, then I will feel fulfilled, because my story can help somebody else, and yours too. You never know until you say something. The Bible says we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony. So that means you will have to say something. And that's going to be the driving force for somebody else to say something, because they're going to see the strength and encouragement in you. So stay encouraged, stay motivated, stay prayerful, and stay self-full. Meaning not selfish, but self-full. Take care of yourself, take care of this, and take care of this. And God will do the rest.